"You don't belong here." The words weren't whispered, they echoed, loud enough for 200 cadets to hear as Jasmine Brooks stepped out of formation. Someone laughed. Another muttered, "Quota pick finally getting kicked out." Jasmine Brooks, the only black woman in the class, stood silent, fingers brushing her father's old Omega watch. They didn't know it was recording everything. They didn't know the FBI would lock down this base in 30 minutes, but even Jasmine didn't know the real enemy was standing right next to her. Have you ever been forced to stay silent while injustice destroyed your life? Drop your story below, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the deadliest weapon you have. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on Nellis Air Force Base as Jasmine walked the 100 yards to the command building. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the weight of maintaining her cover. 5 years of pretending to be less than she was. 5 years of swallowing insults and manufactured failures. 5 years of watching good people get crushed by a system designed to protect the corrupt. Her fingers found the watch again, feeling the subtle vibration that confirmed it was still recording. Everything Captain Nathan Cross was about to say would be evidence. But evidence of what? She'd infiltrated this program to investigate military contractor fraud, but the deeper she dug, the more she realized the corruption went beyond money. It was about power, legacy, and sins that stretched back generations. Captain Cross stood waiting in the briefing room, his 6'2" frame positioned perfectly in the shaft of light from the window. Hollywood couldn't have cast a better all-American hero. Square jaw, piercing blue eyes, sun-kissed hair that somehow stayed perfect despite the desert wind. But Jasmine had learned long ago that monsters often wore the prettiest masks. "Cadet Brooks," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for those deemed unworthy. "I'm afraid your psychological evaluation scores have failed to meet minimum standards." He slid a tablet across the table, the screen showing impossibly low numbers. 2.1 out of 10 for reflexes, 1.8 for decision-making. These are the lowest scores we've recorded in the program's history. Jasmine remained silent, her dark eyes steady on his face. She'd seen the real scores before they'd been altered. Top 5% across the board. But arguing would break character, and Jasmine Brooks, the single mother from Memphis, wouldn't have access to the base's computer systems. So she stood there, spine straight, while Cross continued his performance. "Perhaps you should consider returning to Memphis," he said, and there it was, that slight smirk that revealed his true pleasure in this moment. "I'm sure there are opportunities there more suited to your capabilities." The pause before opportunities was deliberate, loaded with implications about what a black single mother could and couldn't achieve. The other instructors in the room shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. They never did. Lieutenant Porter cleared her throat as if to speak, her hand half raised. For a moment, Jasmine felt a spark of hope. Finally, someone would stand up to this charade. But Cross turned his icy gaze on the female instructor, and Porter's courage evaporated. Her hand dropped, her eyes found the floor, and another ally chose silence over justice. It was a scene Jasmine had witnessed too many times before, in too many places. Good people seeing wrong and choosing comfort over conscience. But she couldn't blame them entirely. The system was designed to punish those who spoke out, to reward those who looked away. Cross had connections that reached to the Pentagon and beyond. Standing up to him meant risking everything. "You have 24 hours to clear out your quarters," Cross continued, his tone shifting to mock sympathy. "I know this must be difficult, especially with your daughter's condition." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only Jasmine could hear. "Such a shame about little Sophia. Heart conditions in children can be so unpredictable. She'll be dead before you can even file an appeal." The words hit like physical blows, but Jasmine's expression never changed. Inside, her mind raced. How did he know about Sophia's heart condition? The medical records were sealed, protected by HIPAA laws and FBI security protocols. Unless someone very high up had given him access, someone who knew exactly who Jasmine really was and what she was investigating. The security cameras in the corner of the room suddenly went dark, their red recording lights blinking out in perfect synchronization. 3 minutes and 17 seconds later, they flickered back to life. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Jasmine had been trained to spot patterns, and this was a pattern she recognized. 3/17, March 17th, the date her grandfather had supposedly died in a plane crash 30 years ago. Someone was sending her a message, but who? Cross seemed oblivious to the camera malfunction, too caught up in his moment of triumph. As Jasmine turned to leave, she noticed Master Sergeant Diego Morales standing in the doorway. The 75-year-old maintenance chief rarely involved himself in cadet affairs, but something in his weathered face made her pause. His eyes flicked to the cameras, then back to her, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Message received. Inside the command building, an ambulance sat idling in the parking lot. The sight of it sent ice through Jasmine's veins. There was no medical emergency on base. She would have heard the sirens. Her eyes found the license plate, KEH-317, another reference to that date, but also something else. KEH in Morse code was dash dot dash dot 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 KEH, King Echo Hotel, military phonetic alphabet. But what did it mean? The driver glanced at her through the side mirror, and she caught a glimpse of a tattoo on his hand, a snake wrapped around the number 8, the same symbol she'd seen in classified files about arms deals in the Middle East, the same symbol that had appeared in her grandfather's final intelligence report before his death. The picture they formed was suddenly falling into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than anything she'd imagined. This wasn't just about military fraud or racial discrimination. This was about revenge, blood debts, and secrets that powerful men had killed to protect. As Jasmine walked back to her quarters, she felt the weight of eyes on her from every direction. Some were hostile, cadets who believed she'd gotten what she deserved. Others were sympathetic but too afraid to show it. And somewhere among them were eyes that belonged to neither category, eyes that had been watching her for reasons she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Sophia's condition was stable, but she'd inexplicably been moved to the top of the transplant list. It should have been good news, but the timing was too convenient. In her 5 years undercover, Jasmine had learned that coincidences were usually anything but. Someone was pulling strings, moving pieces on a chessboard she couldn't fully see. The game had just entered a new phase, and her daughter had become a pawn. Master Sergeant Diego Morales intercepted Jasmine by the motor pool, his movements surprisingly agile for a man of his supposed age. 3 minutes and 17 seconds, he said quietly, his accented voice carrying an urgency she'd never heard before. You know what that means, don't you? He glanced around to ensure they were alone, then pressed a USB drive into her palm. Your father trained you well in the old codes. Time to use that training. The mention of her father sent a jolt through Jasmine. Robert Brooks had been dead for 30 years, killed when she was just an infant. Her mother had raised her on stories of his brilliance as a pilot and intelligence officer, teaching her the codes and signals he'd used in the field. But how could this Mexican maintenance chief know about that? Morales led her to a secure equipment room, engaging the electronic locks behind them. What you're about to see changes everything, he said, plugging the USB into a ruggedized laptop, the screen filled with surveillance footage from 3 nights ago. Captain Cross stood in a shadowy hangar, accepting a thick envelope from a figure whose hand bore a distinctive tattoo. A serpent coiled around the number 8. Deep watch symbol, Jasmine breathed, her FBI training kicking in. It's the mark of the Babylon Ring, arms dealers who've been selling American military tech since the Gulf War. Morales nodded grimly. Keep watching. Cross opened the envelope, and Jasmine's blood ran cold. Inside were photographs of Sophia in her hospital bed, taken from inside the surgical unit, angles that only medical staff should have access to, timestamps from just days ago. How did they get these? Jasmine's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. The FBI had placed multiple layers of security around Sophia, both physical and digital. Morales pulled up another file, this one showing staff rotations at the children's hospital. Look at the attending physician in these photos. See the scar on his left hand? Jasmine leaned closer, her trained eye catching what she'd initially missed, a distinctive crescent-shaped scar across the knuckles. She'd seen that scar before, in Pentagon briefings about military leadership. General Kane, she whispered, but that's impossible. He's been in Washington for months. Morales' weathered face grew even more serious. Victor Kane has body doubles, safe houses, and resources you can't imagine. He's been playing this game since before you were born. The implications crashed over Jasmine like a tidal wave. Her mission to investigate military contractor fraud had stumbled into something far more dangerous. General Victor Kane wasn't just another corrupt official skimming from defense budgets. He was running an entire shadow operation, and somehow her daughter had become leverage. But why Sophia? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Morales pulled up a faded military photo from 1994. A young pilot stood beside an F-15 Eagle, his dark skin gleaming in the desert sun. Even across 30 years, Jasmine recognized her father's smile. Robert Brooks wasn't just killed in a plane crash, Morales said softly. He was murdered because he discovered Kane's operation, the Babylon Ring. Arms sales to Iran, Iraq, anyone who could pay. Your father had evidence that would have sent Kane and a dozen others to prison for life. So this is revenge? Jasmine felt rage building behind her professional calm. Kane is threatening my daughter because my father tried to stop him 30 years ago? But Morales shook his head. Not just revenge. Insurance. Kane knows who you really are, Agent Brooks. He knows the FBI sent you here, but he thinks you're investigating the small-time contractor fraud, not the Babylon Ring. Sophia is his way of keeping you focused on Cross while the real crime continues. He pulled up current deployment schedules, shipping manifests, and technical specifications that made Jasmine's eyes widen. F-22 Raptors, 6 of them scheduled for training accidents next month, already sold to Iranian intermediaries for $200 million each. Kane plans to pocket the money and let America's enemies reverse engineer our best fighter jet. The room felt smaller suddenly, the weight of 3 decades of conspiracy pressing down on them. Jasmine forced herself to think tactically, pushing aside the maternal terror clawing at her chest. Why are you telling me this? Why risk exposing yourself? Morales studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. A sadness so profound it seemed to age him another decade. Because I made a promise to your father. The night before he died, Robert called me, said if anything happened to him, I should watch over his baby girl. Make sure she grew up safe. I've been watching, mija. From a distance, always from a distance. But now the danger has found you anyway. Only 2.3% of military pilots are black women, he continued, his voice heavy with old pain. They made sure of that. Kept the doors closed, the standards rigged, the culture hostile. Your father fought to change it, died for it. And now here you are, his daughter, walking into the same trap. Jasmine absorbed this information, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The FBI didn't know about the Babylon Ring. Her handlers thought she was investigating routine procurement fraud, maybe some racial discrimination. But this conspiracy reached into the highest levels of military command. Who could she trust? Who else was involved? And most importantly, how could she protect Sophia while stopping an arms deal that could destabilize global security? Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but the words made her blood freeze. Sophia just moved to top priority for transplant. Tomorrow at 1400 hours. Check her room's new security camera, northeast corner, installed yesterday. Jasmine's mind flashed to her daughter's frightened face, the IV lines, the beeping monitors. Someone was watching her baby sleep, using her as a pawn in a game that started before Jasmine was even born. The hunter was about to become the hunted, but first she needed to know who all the players were. Cross, she said suddenly. He's too young to have been part of the original conspiracy. What's his connection? Morales smiled grimly. Smart girl, just like your father. Cross isn't who you think he is either. But that revelation? That's going to hurt worse than all the rest. Jasmine drove through the Memphis darkness toward the children's hospital, her mind cataloging every vehicle that followed for more than 2 turns. The FBI training never left you, even when your world was crumbling, especially then. The security camera in Sophia's room had been her breaking point, not just its existence, but its angle, positioned to capture both the bed and the window. Professional, deliberate, a threat disguised as surveillance. She'd disabled it remotely, using her watch's capabilities, but the message had been received. They could reach her daughter any time they wanted. The parking garage was nearly empty at 2 in the morning, but Jasmine still checked every shadow before entering the hospital. Sophia slept peacefully, unaware that her 6-year-old body had become a battlefield in a war she'd never understand. The Lucky Strike bar sat 3 blocks from base, the kind of dive where pilots went to forget their close calls and maintenance crews drowned their frustrations. Jasmine hadn't planned to go there after leaving the hospital, but she needed to think, and sometimes the best place to be invisible was in a crowd. She recognized the back of Nathan Cross's head immediately. That perfect golden hair was unmistakable even in the dim light. He sat alone at the bar, unusual for the base's golden boy. As she watched, he knocked back his 3rd whiskey in 10 minutes. Something was eating at him. Against her better judgment, Jasmine approached. Sometimes the best intelligence came from enemies who didn't know they were being surveilled. She slid onto the bar stool beside him, ordering a beer she had no intention of drinking. "Drowning your sorrows, Captain?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Thought you'd be celebrating. Finally got rid of the unqualified cadet. Cross turned, and for a moment his mask slipped. She saw exhaustion, guilt, and something else. Fear? But then the familiar sneer returned. Brooks, shouldn't you be packing? He lifted his glass in a mock toast, but his hand wasn't quite steady. The whiskey sloshed, spilling across the bar and onto Jasmine's sleeve. Shit, he muttered, grabbing napkins. As he leaned close to dab at the spill, his entire demeanor changed. His voice dropped to barely a whisper, lips hardly moving. July 16th, 1994, Memphis. Your grandfather's crash. It wasn't an accident. Jasmine's breath caught, but she forced herself to remain still. Cross continued pretending to clean the spill while speaking rapidly. Cain killed him, just like he killed my mother. The words hit like physical blows. Jasmine's mind raced, trying to process this impossible revelation. Cross, the privileged senator's son who'd made her life hell, claiming to be a victim of the same conspiracy? He pressed a folded napkin into her hand, then pulled back, raising his voice to normal volume. There, good as new, though I doubt they have dry cleaning in Memphis. His sneer was back, but now she could see the performance in it. The bar had filled with new customers in the last 2 minutes, 12 men, all moving with the controlled awareness of professional soldiers. They spread throughout the room with practiced casualness, but their positioning was tactical. Exits covered, sightlines clear. Cross had seen them too. His body language shifted subtly, angling to shield Jasmine from the nearest threat. Play along, he breathed, then louder. You know what your problem is, Brooks? You never learned your place, coming here thinking you could fly with real pilots. He stood, swaying slightly, selling the drunk act. As he did, he pulled Jasmine to her feet, spinning her toward the wall. To observers, it would look like intimidation. In reality, he was blocking 3 separate lines of fire. My mother was Natasha Volkov, he whispered urgently against her ear. Russian, FSB. But she'd turned, feeding intel to the CIA about arms deals. Cain was her handler. When she found out about Babylon Ring, he had her killed. Made it look like Dad did it. I was 12. His arms came around her in what appeared to be a threatening embrace, but was actually protective. Jasmine could feel tension thrumming through his body, ready to move at the first sign of violence. Why should I believe you? She whispered back, even as her instincts screamed that he was telling the truth. The pain in his voice was too raw to be fake. Because in 30 seconds those men are going to try to kill us both, Cross replied. Cain knows I've been investigating him. Knows I made contact with you. We're both loose ends now. He slipped something into her pocket, a flash drive. Everything I've collected in 5 years. Guard it with your life. The first man moved, reaching inside his jacket. Cross reacted instantly, shoving Jasmine toward the back exit while throwing his whiskey glass at the overhead light. The bar plunged into semi-darkness just as silenced weapons cleared holsters. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Cross flipped a table, creating temporary cover as Jasmine ran for the exit. She burst into the alley, combat training taking over. 2 men waited by a van, weapons already drawn. Before they could react, a figure dropped from the fire escape above. Morales, moving with impossible agility for his age. His strikes were precise, economical, dropping both men in seconds. Move, he barked, but Jasmine hesitated. Cross was still inside. Gunfire erupted, no longer silenced. Through the doorway, she saw him fighting 3 men at once, using bar stools and bottles as weapons. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead, but he kept moving, kept fighting, buying her time to escape. We can't leave him, she said, starting back toward the door. Morales caught her arm with surprising strength. He knows the risks. Our priority is keeping you alive. You're the only one who can stop this. More men rounded the corner, weapons raised. Morales produced a pistol from nowhere, laying down covering fire as they retreated. Jasmine's mind cataloged details even as they ran. License plates, faces, tactical formations. The FBI would need everything she could remember, if she lived long enough to report it. They reached Morales' truck just as Cross burst from the bar, his shirt torn and bloody but still moving. He'd fought his way through 6 professional killers and somehow survived. Get in, Morales shouted, already gunning the engine. Cross dove into the truck bed as bullets sparked off the tailgate. They roared into the night, tires smoking, leaving chaos behind. How? Jasmine gasped, looking at Morales. How does a 75-year-old maintenance chief fight like that? Morales glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and for the first time, she saw something familiar in those weathered features. Something in the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes. Because I'm not really 75, he said quietly. and my name isn't Diego Morales." Her phone buzzed, a message that made her blood freeze. Security footage attached. Sophia's empty hospital bed. A note on her pillow. 1400 hours tomorrow. Come alone, or she dies. The cup hadn't just overflowed, it had shattered completely. The abandoned hangar sat on the outskirts of Nellis, a relic from the Cold War when B-52 bombers needed shelter from nuclear nightmares. Now it served as Morales' sanctuary, hidden behind false walls and forgotten in bureaucratic filing systems. He led Jasmine and Cross through a maze of security measures, biometric scanners disguised as rust patches, pressure plates that looked like cracked concrete. Finally, they reached an inner chamber that took Jasmine's breath away. The walls were covered with 30 years of investigation. Photographs, documents, flight plans, financial records, weapons manifests, all connected by red string, like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except this conspiracy was real. "My God," Cross breathed, his injuries forgotten as he stared at the evidence. "This goes back to the 80s. Morales moved to an industrial sink, pulling off what Jasmine now realized were prosthetic additions to his face. Layer by layer, he removed 3 decades of disguise. The nose straightened, the jowls disappeared, the age lines revealed themselves as masterful makeup. When he finally turned back to them, Jasmine's knees nearly buckled. The face was older, scarred by time and surgery, but unmistakable. She was looking at her grandfather. "Hello, Sparrow," Robert Brooks said softly, using her childhood nickname. "I'm sorry for the deception, but staying dead was the only way to keep you and your mother safe." The room spun. Jasmine gripped the table, her trained composure finally cracking. 30 years, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You let us mourn you for 30 years. Mom died thinking you were gone. I grew up without—" Her voice broke completely. The little girl who'd studied her father's codes and signals, who'd learned Morse code from his old training manuals, who'd become an FBI agent partly to honor his memory. That little girl was suddenly, devastatingly present. Cross stood frozen, blood still dripping from his forehead, watching this impossible reunion. His own family tragedy paled beside the magnitude of this deception. Yet he understood the brutal mathematics of survival in Kane's world. Sometimes, love meant letting people think you were dead. "Every letter I tried to send was intercepted," Robert continued, his voice heavy with decades of regret. "Every attempt to contact you led to threats against your lives. Kane had watchers everywhere. The only way to protect you was to become someone else entirely. To wait, to prepare." He gestured to the walls of evidence. Victor Kane didn't just kill pilots who discovered his arms dealing. He built an empire on their graves. The Babylon Ring controls 40% of black market weapons sales globally. F-16s to Pakistan, radar systems to China, and now F-22s to Iran. Each sale weakens America and enriches monsters. He pulled out a classified folder marked with symbols Jasmine recognized from her FBI briefings. But selling weapons is just part of it. Kane has been placing his people throughout the military command structure for 3 decades. Generals, admirals, Pentagon officials. A shadow government within our government. "The Kingmaker," Cross said suddenly. "You're the Kingmaker, the legendary intelligence operative who disappeared in '94. Robert nodded grimly. "A name I never wanted, but yes. I spent years building networks, turning assets, gathering intelligence, all preparing for the day I could bring King down. That day has finally come, but—" He looked at Jasmine with eyes full of pain. "I never intended for you to be involved. When I learned the FBI had assigned you to investigate the base, I tried to warn them off. But you're too good at your job. Too much like your old man. You found threads they didn't want pulled." The revelation should have brought comfort, knowing her grandfather had been watching over her. Instead, Jasmine felt rage building. "You knew I was here for 5 years, knew I was in danger, and you said nothing?" "Because revealing myself would have signed your death warrant." Robert's composure finally cracked. "Kane has your psychological profiles, your mission parameters, everything. The moment he knew I was alive, he would have killed you and Sophia without hesitation. The only protection was my death." He pulled up surveillance footage on one of his monitors. But something changed 6 months ago. Kane started making mistakes. Getting sloppy, age, arrogance, or maybe just greed. He accelerated the F-22 sales, pushed too hard. That's when I knew we had a window, a chance to end this. I started leaving you clues, breadcrumbs only you would recognize, leading you toward the truth while trying to keep you safe. "Safe?" Jasmine laughed bitterly. "They have Sophia, my daughter, your great-granddaughter. is leverage in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The weight of it all crashed down on her. The manipulation, the lies, the impossible choices. She'd joined the FBI to serve justice, but justice had become a maze of mirrors where even family couldn't be trusted. Her phone buzzed. Another message, this time with video. Sophia lay on what looked like an operating table, still unconscious but surrounded by medical equipment. A timer in the corner counted down from 18 hours. Demonstration tomorrow, the text read. You fly, you die, she lives. You refuse, she dies, you live. Jesus Christ, Cross muttered, his face pale beneath the blood. He's really going to do it. Use a 6-year-old as leverage for mass murder. Robert studied the video with professional detachment, but Jasmine saw his hands tremble. The demonstration, tell me about it. Cross pulled up files on his phone, wincing, as movement aggravated his injuries. Annual display for Pentagon brass and foreign military attachés. Officially, it's to show off pilot training. Unofficially, it's where deals get made. Kane arranged for 6 F-22 AOs to perform. I was supposed to lead the formation, but... He glanced at Jasmine. After today's bar fight, I'm probably off the roster. They'll need a replacement pilot. Me, Jasmine said flatly. They want me to fly an F-22 in front of military officials from around the world. And then what? Crash it? Defect with it? Robert was already pulling up technical specifications. No. They want you to fly it perfectly, to prove that even an unqualified pilot can handle America's best fighter. It's a sales pitch. Look how easy our tech is to steal, to copy, to defeat. The buyers will be watching through encrypted feeds. The moment you land safely, 6 Raptors worth of technology transfers to enemy hands. The cruel elegance of the plan was breathtaking. Use a grieving mother's love to betray her country. Create a narrative where a dismissed black female cadet steals military secrets for revenge. Kane would get his money, America would be humiliated, and Jasmine would take the fall for treason. There has to be another way, Cross said, but even he sounded doubtful. 18 hours to save a child and stop an arms deal that could shift global power. There is, Robert said quietly, but it requires us to trust each other completely. And it means revealing everything to enemies who've been watching for 30 years. He looked at his granddaughter, seeing her mother's determination and his own stubborn refusal to surrender. Jasmine, what I'm about to propose will put you at the center of a firestorm. The FBI, the military, Kane's organization, they'll all come for you. Are you prepared for that? Jasmine thought of Sophia's laugh, her tiny hands, the way she still believed her mother could fix anything. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to save my daughter and stop these bastards, even if it means flying into hell itself. Robert smiled then, the expression transforming his scarred face. That's my granddaughter. All right then, let me tell you about the second F-22, the one Kane doesn't know exists. 5 years ago, Jasmine had stood outside the delivery room, watching through reinforced glass as doctors fought to save her newborn daughter. Sophia had arrived 2 months early, her tiny body struggling with complications that required immediate surgery. The blood-type match they needed was so rare that the hospital had nearly given up hope when a donor miraculously appeared, a man who insisted on remaining anonymous, who sat in the donation chair for hours to provide what Sophia needed. Jasmine had caught a glimpse of him leaving, tall, blonde, moving with military precision despite the exhaustion of giving so much blood. She'd been too overwhelmed with gratitude and fear to investigate further. Now, staring at Nathan Cross as he reviewed flight plans in Robert's bunker, the pieces finally clicked into place. It was you, she said suddenly, interrupting his technical discussion with Robert. 5 years ago, you were the donor who saved Sophia. Cross froze, his hands stilling on the keyboard. For a moment, his carefully maintained facade crumbled entirely. How did you... He stopped, shoulders sagging. It doesn't matter. Yes, I was doing routine blood work for deployment when they flagged my type. AB negative with the Duffy negative phenotype. 1 in 10,000 chance. The hospital was desperate. He turned to face her, and Jasmine saw pain that matched her own. I'd just learned about my mother, what Kane did to her. I was drowning in rage, planning revenge, and then they told me about this baby who would die without my blood. This innocent child who needed what I could give. It felt like, I don't know, redemption, a chance to save someone when I couldn't save her. But you knew who I was, Jasmine pressed. You had to. The FBI covers were good but not perfect. Cross laughed bitterly. I knew. Kane had flagged you the moment you applied to the program. The daughter of Robert Brooks, following in Daddy's footsteps, he thought it was cosmic justice. He'd killed your father, now he'd destroy your career. I was supposed to help, make your life hell, force you out, discredit you completely." He met her eyes, and she saw the self-loathing there. "And I did. God help me, I played my part perfectly. Every failed test, every humiliation, every barrier. I put them there, all while knowing I'd saved your daughter's life, all while hating myself for what I'd become." And the video call came at exactly 0900 hours, Kane's face filling the screen with grandfatherly concern that made Jasmine's skin crawl. Behind him, Sophia lay on what was clearly a medical transport gurney, IV lines feeding into her small arms. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable. "Miss Brooks," Kane said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "Or should I say, Agent Brooks? Let's dispense with pretense. You know who I am. I know who you are, and we both know what needs to happen today." He adjusted the camera angle to show more of the room. Medical equipment lined the walls, all of it surgical quality. A heart-lung machine stood ready. Doctors in scrubs moved in the background, preparing for a procedure that would either save or end Sophia's life. "The terms are simple," Kane continued. "At 1400 hours, you will pilot an F-22 Raptor in the scheduled demonstration. You will perform flawlessly, proving that American technology can be mastered by anyone with basic training. Our international guests will be most impressed. After landing, you will walk away and speak of this to no one. In return, your daughter receives the heart transplant she needs from a donor who tragically passed away this morning. Refuse, and there will be no operation, no miracle, no future for little Sophia." Jasmine's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" Kane smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Because I'm a grandfather too, Miss Brooks. My grandson, Nathan, sits beside you even now. Oh yes, I know about your unlikely alliance. Did he tell you he's my son?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. "Cross? Kane's son?" She turned to stare at him, seeing his face drain of color. "No," he whispered. "That's not. Mother told me my father was—" "Senator Charles Cross. A useful fiction," Kane interrupted. "Your mother was indeed Natasha Volkov, but she was never married to that pompous fool. She was mine, my asset, my lover, my betrayer. When she tried to expose the Babylon ring, I had no choice. But I let you live, Nathan. Raised you from afar, guided your career. You're my blood, whether you like it or not." Cross lurched to his feet, rage and revulsion warring on his face. "You murdered her. She loved you, and you had her killed." Kane's expression hardened. "She chose her precious ethics over her family, just as you're doing now. But there's still time, son. Join me. Help me complete this transaction, and I'll forgive your recent indiscretions. We can rule this empire together." "I'd rather die," Cross snarled, but Jasmine heard the pain beneath the anger. Another child destroyed by the sins of their parents, another life twisted by Kane's web of manipulation. They were all pawns in his game. Sophia, Cross, even Robert, who stood silent in the shadows, his own face revealing decades of carefully suppressed fury. "One more thing," Kane added, his attention returning to Jasmine. "Your grandfather. I know he's alive. I've always known. Did you really think I'd let the great kingmaker disappear without keeping tabs? He's been my unwitting asset for 30 years, gathering evidence I've allowed him to find, building a case that will never see court, because who would believe a ghost? A man who abandoned his family, faked his death, lived a lie? No, my dear. Robert Brooks is as compromised as the rest of us." The screen shifted to show satellite imagery of their current location. "I know exactly where you are. My men surround that hangar. But I'm not unreasonable. Fly the plane, save your daughter, and I'll let you all walk away. This conflict between us ends today, one way or another." The call ended, leaving them in silence, broken only by the hum of electronics. Sophia's face lingered on the blank screen like an afterimage, a reminder of what hung in the balance. "It's true, isn't it?" Cross asked Robert, his voice hollow. "You knew he was watching. You let him think he was in control." Robert nodded slowly. "The best trap is one the prey doesn't know exists." "Yes, I knew Victor was monitoring me, feeding him false intelligence mixed with just enough truth to keep him confident, building toward this moment when he would overreach." "But Sophia," Jasmine began. "Is safe," Robert interrupted, "or she will be. Because Kane made one crucial error. He assumed the second F-22 was destroyed in a training accident 3 years ago. The pilot died, the aircraft was written off, the wreckage supposedly scattered across the Mojave. But that pilot was my asset. The crash was staged, and that Raptor has been hidden, maintained, and upgraded ever since. Waiting for the day we would need an ace in the hole, he pulled up technical schematics that made Jasmine's pulse race. 2 F-22s, one pilot publicly flying Kane's mission, one ghost aircraft appearing at exactly the right moment to change everything. It's time to show Victor Kane what happens when you threaten the wrong family. "I won't let Sophia be leverage," Jasmine said, her voice steel. "But I won't betray my country either. So we do this my way. I fly for my daughter's life, but I fly to end this forever." She looked at Cross, seeing her own determination mirrored in his eyes. They were both children of monsters, both trying to break free from inherited sins. "Together?" he asked quietly. "Together," she confirmed, because sometimes the only way to defeat a legacy of betrayal was to trust someone who understood the cost. The countdown continued. 14 hours to save an innocent child and stop a conspiracy 3 decades in the making. Time to show Kane that threatening a mother's child was his final, fatal mistake. The F-22 Raptor responded to Jasmine's touch like a living thing. $200 million of American engineering prowess wrapped around one determined mother's fury. She'd spent the morning in Robert's simulator, learning the aircraft's quirks and capabilities while cross-programmed their coordinated attack plan. Now, at 1350 hours, she sat in the actual cockpit, feeling the twin Pratt & Whitney engines thrumming with barely contained power. Through her helmet's display, she could see the crowd gathering below. Pentagon officials, foreign military attachés, and somewhere among them, the buyers for Kane's treason. Her grandfather's voice crackled through the secure comm channel he'd piggybacked onto the military frequencies. "Remember the Memphis slide, Sparrow? I taught it to you when you were 12, flying that old Cessna over the cotton fields. Same principle, just 500 miles per hour faster." The control tower cleared her for takeoff, confusion evident in their voices, the dismissed cadets somehow back in their airspace, somehow in their most advanced fighter. But Kane had smoothed the way, his authority overriding standard protocols. He wanted this show to go perfectly. He was about to get more performance than he'd bargained for. Jasmine advanced the throttles, feeling the acceleration press her back into the ejection seat. The Raptor leaped skyward, climbing at an angle that would have torn lesser aircraft apart. Below, she could hear the crowd's collective gasp over the open frequencies. They'd expected a basic demonstration from a failed cadet. Instead, they were witnessing mastery that few pilots ever achieve. For 10 minutes, she flew Kane's program flawlessly. Barrel rolls, Immelman turns, high G maneuvers that pushed human endurance to its limits. All the while, she remembered Sophia's face, her daughter's trust that Mommy would make everything better. Each perfect execution was a promise. "I'm coming, baby. Mommy's coming." Then Cross's voice cut through the performance chatter. "Hostile radar lock, 4 F-16s vectoring your position," Kane's insurance policy. She'd expected this. Kane wouldn't trust her completely, wouldn't risk his prize asset escaping. The F-16s formed up around her, their pilots faceless behind tinted visors, but their intent clear. Any deviation from the plan would mean a missile in her tailpipe. "Phase 2, Robert announced. "Nathan, you are cleared hot." From the east, another Raptor appeared on Jasmine's radar. The ghost aircraft, painted matte black, no identification numbers, officially dead for 3 years. Cross had spent the last hours familiarizing himself with its upgraded systems, and now he'd proved why he'd earned his wings despite his father's interference. He came in low and fast, using terrain masking techniques that shouldn't have been possible in the Nevada desert. The F-16 pilots reacted with trained precision, 2 peeling off to intercept, while 2 stayed with Jasmine. But Cross had learned from the best. His mother, the Russian ace who dominated Cold War skies before love and conscience turned her westward. He rolled inverted between the interceptors. The Memphis slide executed at speeds that turned physics into poetry. "Warning, shots fired," someone reported, but Cross was already gone, dancing through the sky like his aircraft weighed nothing. The crowd below had noticed the intruder, fingers pointing, voices rising in alarm. This wasn't part of the scheduled demonstration. Kane's voice erupted across the emergency frequency. "All units, splash the black aircraft. Repeat, splash the hostile." But confusion reigned. Was this part of the show, a surprise demonstration? The foreign observers were riveted, watching American pilots engage each other with technology they'd only dreamed of possessing. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued her routine, pretending ignorance of the chaos above, buying time for the next phase. General Victor Kane emerged from the VIP viewing area. commandeering an F-35 Lightning that had been on static display. At 62, he shouldn't have been able to fly combat missions, but rage and desperation gave him strength. His son, his blood, had betrayed him. The child he'd protected even after killing the mother who birthed him. It was intolerable, unforgivable. "You think you know the sky, boy," Kane snarled across the comm channels. "I was flying before you were born. I've killed better pilots than you'll ever be." The F-35 roared to life, its single engine screaming as Kane pushed it toward the fight. Cross broke right, narrowly avoiding a missile from one of the F-16s. "Jasmine, we need Phase 3 now!" But she was already moving, her Raptor suddenly breaking from its demonstration pattern. The Memphis slide, but modified, improved, made deadly by 30 years of evolution. She inverted at 500 feet, a move that should have killed her, pulling negative Gs that turned her vision red. The crowd screamed, certain they were about to witness a crash. Instead, Jasmine's Raptor leveled out at 50 feet, screaming across the runway so low that jet wash knocked dignitaries to their knees. As she passed the main reviewing stand, her weapons bay opened briefly. Not to fire, but to deploy electronic warfare pods that Robert had installed. Every screen in a half-mile radius erupted with images. Classified documents, bank transfers, photos of Kane meeting with Iranian agents, Chinese military officials, anyone willing to pay for American secrets. 30 years of evidence displayed in seconds, impossible to deny or suppress. "No!" Kane's scream echoed across the frequencies as he realized what was happening. His carefully constructed empire, exposed to the very people he'd been selling to. The foreign attachés weren't seeing a sales pitch anymore. They were witnessing the unraveling of the greatest intelligence disaster in American history. He turned his F-35 toward Jasmine, murder in his heart. But Cross was there, his ghost Raptor positioned between them. "Hello, Dad," he said quietly. "Time to end this." Father and son, circling each other at 30,000 feet. Below, sirens wailed as FBI agents flooded the base, Robert's final gift, coordinates and evidence delivered to authorities who weren't on Kane's payroll. "You're my blood," Kane roared, lining up a missile shot. "Everything I did was for us, for our legacy." Cross's voice was steady, sad. "Your legacy dies today, and I'll live with being your son, but I won't live as your weapon." He performed a maneuver Jasmine had never seen, something beyond training or technology. Pure instinct, pure defiance. The two aircraft merged on radar for a heartbeat, then separated. Kane's F-35 shuddered, damage alarms screaming. His son had used the Raptor's thrust vectoring to force a controlled collision, sacrificing his own aircraft to cripple his father's. Both planes began falling, pilots ejecting in sequence. Cross and Kane floating down under parachutes, still father and son, even as everything else fell apart. But the drama wasn't over. A low rumble filled the sky, a sound from another era. From the north, a B-2 Spirit materialized like death itself, the strategic bomber, invisible to radar, carrying enough ordnance to level the base if necessary. Robert's voice filled the airwaves, calm and final. "Victor Kane, Marcus Stone. Whatever name you use, this is Robert Brooks, the ghost you created, the man you murdered who wouldn't stay dead. 30 years ago, you took everything from me. Today, I return the favor." The bomber's bay doors opened, but instead of bombs, cameras emerged. High definition, satellite-linked, broadcasting everything to news networks worldwide. The ultimate exposure for a man who'd lived in shadows. Your buyers are watching, Victor. Your allies, your victims, everyone. They see you falling from the sky, defeated by the children you tried to corrupt. How does it feel to lose everything? The arrest of General Victor Kane made headlines across the world, but Jasmine barely noticed. She stood in the pediatric ICU, watching Sophia breathe steadily for the first time in months. The heart transplant had proceeded flawlessly. The donor had been real, though Kane's timing had been manipulation. Her daughter would live, would grow, would have the chance Jasmine had almost lost, fighting shadows and secrets. Nathan Cross sat in federal custody, technically under arrest but actually in protective custody. His testimony was unraveling decades of corruption, naming names that reached into Congress, the Pentagon, and boardrooms across America. He faced charges for his role in Jasmine's harassment, but his cooperation and the evidence he'd gathered would likely mean probation rather than prison. More importantly, he was finally free from his father's shadow. FBI Director Patricia Hawthorne stood at the window beside Jasmine, her usually stern face softened by something like admiration. 5 years undercover and we never knew the real scope of what you'd stumbled into. The Babylon Ring, Kane's network, your grandfather's operation, it's the intelligence coup of the century. She paused, studying Jasmine's exhausted but determined face. There'll be a medal ceremony, public recognition. You've earned it. Jasmine shook her head. No ceremonies, no publicity. I've lived enough lies. I just want to fly and raise my daughter. She touched the window, leaving fingerprints on the glass. Besides, the real hero is sleeping in that bed. She survived what would have broken adults. That's the only recognition I need. Rachel Porter appeared in the doorway, hesitant but determined. The instructor who'd stayed silent carried a burden of guilt that showed in every line of her face. Agent Brooks, Jasmine, I need to apologize. I stood there while they humiliated you. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing my position, my career. I chose comfort over conscience, and I'm sorry. Jasmine studied her for a long moment, remembering her own father's words about dangerous choices. Your silence was a choice, Lieutenant, but so is your presence here today. What matters is what you do next. Porter straightened, military bearing returning. I've submitted my resignation from the Air Force, but first, I'm testifying before the Inspector General about every incident of discrimination I've witnessed or participated in. The culture has to change. 6 months later, Nellis Air Force Base had transformed. Jasmine stood before a new class of cadets as Director of Training, a position created specifically to address the systemic failures Kane had exploited. 45% of the incoming class were women or minorities, selected through a transparent process that valued talent over connections. The old boy network was dead, replaced by something that looked more like America itself. Nathan Cross instructed beside her, wearing an ankle monitor but teaching with passion about ethical flying and moral courage. His students didn't know his full story. That would come later, in history books and cautionary tales. But they recognized someone who'd faced darkness and chosen light. Robert Brooks had officially returned from the dead at 78, his story captivating a nation hungry for heroes who played the long game. He spent his days teaching advanced tactics to select pilots, sharing decades of knowledge that had been hidden in shadows. But his greatest joy came in the evenings, when Sophia would climb into his lap and beg for stories about the old days, about her brave mother, and the grandfather who'd watched over them from afar. One perfect Nevada morning, Jasmine led a formation of F-22Os across the desert sky. Below, families gathered for the base's first public air show since the scandal. She could see Sophia in the crowd, now 12 years old and healthy, wearing her own junior pilot wings. The girl who'd nearly died as leverage in a monster's game now dreamed of following her mother's contrails. "Demo flight, this is Tower," the radio crackled. "You are cleared for unrestricted performance. Show them what you've got." Jasmine smiled, remembering another voice, another time, her father teaching her to fly over Memphis cotton fields, telling her the sky had no limits except those people imposed. She'd learned the hard way how true that was. Limits of prejudice, corruption, inherited sin. But she'd also learned that limits could be shattered by those brave enough to push past them. She rolled inverted at 15,000 feet. The Memphis slide evolved into something entirely her own. Her wingmen followed, trusting her completely. 2 women, 1 Latino man, all pilots who would have been rejected under the old system. They painted the sky with precision and power, showing watchers below what America could be when it lived up to its promises. In the VIP section, Director Hawthorne watched with satisfaction. The Babylon Ring investigation had led to 200 arrests across 17 countries. Weapons trafficking networks that had operated for decades were destroyed. Most importantly, the culture of silence that had enabled such corruption was breaking down. Whistleblowers came forward, protected by new laws and leaders who understood that integrity mattered more than connection. As the demonstration ended, Jasmine brought her Raptor down in a perfect landing. She could see Sophia running toward the flight line, Robert keeping pace despite his age. Nathan waited by the hangar, free from his monitor now, rebuilding a life untainted by his father's legacy. They were an unlikely family, forged by conspiracy and bonded by survival. But they were proof that blood didn't define destiny, that choices mattered more than inheritance. "Mom!" Sophia called out as Jasmine climbed down from the cockpit. "That was amazing. When can I start learning?" Jasmine pulled her daughter close, remembering another child who'd dreamed of flying, who'd lost her father to secrets and lies. "Whenever you're ready, baby. The sky's waiting for you." She looked up at the endless Nevada blue, where contrails traced promises across heaven. Somewhere up there, the ghosts of the past had finally found peace. And down here, the living were building something better, a world where silence wasn't safety, where courage counted more than connections, where a simple woman could bring down an empire and still land on her feet. The sky had no limits anymore. Not for her, not for Sophia, not for anyone willing to reach for it. And that, more than any medal or recognition, was victory enough.
You made it through. You deserve a medal, or at least another BD Stories episode. Hit that next video and let's keep the madness going.